Okay, welcome everyone once again to Crowper with the old team, Sean, Peter, and Tim. Before we begin tonight's proceedings, I thought I'd just maybe say a quick word or two. Um, I've been enjoined to ask people to who are enjoy any of what they see to like and subscribe because it's we obviously it's partly because we respond to enthusiasm and it helps with the algorithm and so on and so forth. So if you can see your way clear to liking and subscribing either to the channel or the podcast, that would be magnificent. We also, of course, comment. We'd be delighted to hear your opinions and interact with them. We try to respond to everyone if we can, but we would like to sort of open up the debate, hear your opinions on the album that we're discussing, hear your opinions on our opinions of the album, just so that we don't feel like three Robinson Crusoes or whatever it is over here. So yeah, that's my formal bit done. And now let's move on to the main topic of the evening, which is evening. I mean, I always say that. I mean, it's the evening for us. Who knows what time people are listening to this. The main topic of the evening, which is tonight's album, which is Led Zeppelin 2. So tonight we've decided to sort of fulfill the classic rock part of our brief, because until now we've been looking at sort of various prog thingamajigs. And so, as usual, we'll begin with the opinions, our general opinions of the album. I want to say, Peter, would you like to open
Yes.
open open the
Proceedings.
discussion?
Yes, of course. Yeah. So Led Zeppelin 2 is an album I've known for a long time. I mean, I've known it since I first picked up the guitar, really. I think the copy I've got now is probably stolen from someone, the vinyl copy. And we sort of learnt, I think one of these in particular as a band when I was playing when I was about 16, 17, badly, but so it obviously had a big impact. The sound on this album I think is incredible. Compared to a lot of stuff around at the time, it's really bombastic. I mean, some of the sounds that come out, just you don't associate with that period at all. However, as an adult, I think, and having heard a lot more music now, I'm not a huge fan. Not a huge fan of this album. I actually prefer the ones on either side, which is I think one is well worth listening to, and I think three really takes some of the aspects of this album and sort of explodes them into just a more interesting area. Um, I think lyrically, it's a bit empty. This album, it's hard to find. There are a few moments, a few moments where the lyrics roll beautifully, or there is actually some good lyric writing, but it's kind of here and there. I think it's a bit lazy. I think when it comes to lyrics. Um, Flipping to the other side, musicianship, fantastic. I mean, especially obviously the John Paul Jones and Bonham thing, I just think is incredible. And still now, to listen to that, you just think it sounds so good. If you could just sort of, just to have them separated out, they just sound incredible. Yes, I'm not proposing we do this. I think Robert Plant can be really good. And in places he just shines on this album, doesn't he? You just think it's so clear what he's trying to do, and it really works. I've always had a bit of a problem with Jimmy Page, and I know that as a guitarist, I found him the least interesting, actually, of any of those late 60s guitarists. I think it seems to be a lack of sort of taste. I think that's what it is. It's a bit tasteless, some of this, and there's a lot of posturing. And when I got to see eventually the Led Zeppelin DVD, and the Albert Hall gig, I thought he spends a lot of time, doesn't he, sort of dancing around things, like there's a lot of sort of movement that's unnecessary, and I don't know quite what that's about. But to sort of conclude my sort of vision of it, is that I think what's odd about this album is that there's a sort of strange lack of progression for the time period that it's in. It's very sort of set, isn't it, in its way, and it's not prepared to do anything with that. It's in a period of great progression. Yeah, it doesn't seem to yield to that at all. A bit like the Rolling Stones, a lot of Stones fans love that sort of late 60s, early 70s Stones, don't they? And everything they did after it, because it just doesn't seem to progress anywhere. I think there are moments of progression in this album. I think there are, and there's signs of things to come, but they seem very hell bent on kind of, sticking to their ways. And I don't know, there's something really exciting about it. At the same time, kind of lacks interest as well. So it's a bit of an enigma, this album, I find.
Right, very good. Yes, I had a horrible thought there that maybe this whole section would just be us saying that albums by them that we would have rather discussed than this one. Um, but we'll see about that. But yeah, there's a lot to
Yeah.
sort of chew over there, but
Mm.
I'm sure we'll come back to it.
Mm.
Sean, do you have some sort of opening thoughts on the
Yeah,
album?
I'd just be brief. I think like Peter, I mean, yeah, Whole Lot of Love was a song that, well, I was in a band early on at school in the sixth form. Well, you all know Bob. He won't be a friend of ours, but probably not be listening to this broadcast. Um, but he loved Jimmy Page, and so we did murdered actually is the word to use. It's a whole lot of love and Moby Dick and rock and roll and things like that. Tried to do Stairway to Heaven, but yeah, whole lot of love. But yeah, what always stands out for me is the drumming. Obviously, being a reformed well, semi-retired drummer, and it just still excites me. I listened to this again and I thought, oh, that's the reason I wanted to play drums, really, apart from all the, Ringo Starr and everything. So that still find exciting. The bass playing, actually, yeah, as Peter said, that really sort of stood out to me. I could really hear it, and I thought, my God, he's fantastic. I think he was described. Someone described him as snake-like on the bass, but there you
Hmm.
go. I don't exactly know how a
What,
snake can. Got no fingers,
what
have they? Got no digits. So I
do
don't
you
know how
mean
that
it, like
works.
in the sense of the Garden of Eden?
Yeah.
Um, but I think what gets me a little bit with this album is I like it, and then I flip over. I won't get too deep into it, but I flip over to Heartbreaker, and I sort of think, oh, this is the beginning of cock rock, really here. So that puts me off, and I think some of the lyrics are, it's either about Tolkien or sex, isn't it, really? So, I don't know, it's a little bit sort of beneath beneath the belt. Actually, the Tolkien stuff I can almost forgive, but some of it. But then again, they're ripping off a lot of the blues, as Hendrix said, didn't he?
Yeah.
So, um, you know, they are guilty of that. But yeah, I played it a lot when I was younger, but not so much now. But it was very interesting going back to it. I will say that.
Mm.
Thanks very much. I mean, again, lots to talk about. Just to give people a glimpse behind the curtain, Sean told us before we came on air that he had bought a new microphone. I don't know where my ears were in the sound test, but maybe Sean, if you could move, you sound like you're in a stadium. I don't know if you
Do
can move
I?
the mic a bit further away.
Further away. Okay. How's that? Has it got echo on it or reverb or
It's still
something?
quite loud,
Is it? Oh
but it's
dear.
okay. If
If
you
I
can do
turn
anything
it,
about that, great.
let's
If not, don't worry.
let's see if I can turn it down. If you can.
Yeah, I'll turn it off. Whatever. We can't hear you at all now. I think I would. I mean, of the two, I think I would prefer to hear you a bit rather than not at all. If it's a binary choice, you've gone completely silent.
Tim, tell us about your opinions on the album.
Yeah, good idea. Yeah, Sean, dive back in when you're ready. Um, yeah, well, I think that this is yeah. I mean, Led Zeppelin. I think some of what you've said kind of resonates with me. I did love Red Zeppelin. There you are. Not Dread Zeppelin. I did love Led Zeppelin as a kid, I think, and I kind of feel like I kind of went off them as I got older. But that's not to say that they're not great. It's just that as always, it's a question of taste, isn't it? Um, I think the reason why I sort of went off them a bit was because, well, yeah, it's just not quite my taste in music now. I think I prefer music that's a bit more composed, and I think this is more sort of like kind of vibe music.
Hmm.
It's this kind of it's feel music, and nothing wrong with that. But it is a particular sort of thing, isn't it? It's a particular genre. I mean, I read one of the early reviews of this album said that this album was described this album as dumb, right? But not in the American sense of stupid, but in the British sense of not without voice.
Right.
So, I mean, I found that quite resonant. I mean, the idea that this is music that's kind of, it's sort of, it's based on feeling rather than anything that's articulatable. And I think it's a sort of, I always think that it's funny that these sort of white English lads were doing this essentially American music. I don't think it's an accident that they were so popular in America. I think they were much more popular in America than they were in Britain. And I don't think that's an accident because I think they're doing folk music, but it's like American folk music. It's not English folk music.
Yeah.
Because English folk music is more sort of singing and song based. And American folk music is sort of more instrumentally based, I think. And as I say, sort of based on mood really and feel. So they're not really writing songs as such. They're writing guitar riffs, and then the thing about the singing and the words that kind of gets overlaid on top of it. And I think if you're into the guitar riffs, I think that's great. And I think some of the ones on this album really work very well. I think this is a real. I think this is a paradigm album for them, even though I think a lot of people don't like it. A lot of people don't rate it particularly. I think that this is. I think it kind of the mix kind of works for me on this album. The other album I like by them a lot is Physical Graffiti, and I think that like this album, that album is very well programmed. I think it sort of works as an album, and in fact, in Physical Graffiti's case, it's a double album, so that's pretty good achievement. But those are a couple of albums that I admire from them, yeah, I mean that's pretty much all I had to say. I don't like the title. Is the other thing?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that it kind of sits so perfectly with them, doesn't it? Let's call it one. Let's call it two. Or it's really it's not very imaginative for that period of time.
Yeah. That's right. It feels lazy, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And then by the fourth one, they gave up naming them all together, which was, I suppose, a sort of regression.
Can you hear me now?
We can. Good to have you. Good to have you back, Shaun.
How's the volume level?
That is perfect.
Okay, I've turned it down a bit. Well, it is known as the Brown Bomber, isn't it?
What, the album?
Led Zeppelin 2. It's known as the Brown Bomber.
What? Because of the cover and all that.
Because of the brown cover. Yeah, basically, yeah.
Oh, I see. Yes, the Brown Bomber. Yeah,
not a very good title, is it? The Brown Bomber.
No.
Sounds like
no, it's not.
John Bonham's been to the gents again or something, doesn't it? Really.
Right.
Anyway, carry on. Sorry to lower the tone so early.
All right, good. Well, look, let's go to Turner's Turntable. Do you have anything for us, Peter, on sort of any stats?
I do. Led Zeppelin 2 is Led Zeppelin's second album. Just to point that out. I mean, I don't think it could be anything else. This was released on the 31st of October, 1969, which is actually Halloween. And I guess, Halloween wasn't as big then. But, it may have been deliberate in some way. Released in the US actually a week earlier than it was released in England as well. So they had already kind of made that transition. Some of the sessions took place also in several locations across the US and in the United Kingdom. I was thinking we'll come back to some of the language of it because there is a bit of an American language thing, which we were talking about with Jethro Tull before as well, weren't we? The album's production was credited mainly to Jimmy Page, actually. And this was the first time that Eddie Kramer got involved as their engineer as well. Eddie Kramer became quite big, didn't he, around that sort of period, late 60s, early 70s, with other bands as well. So yes, Jimmy Page is sort of the central figure of this album.
Yeah. Um, all right, good. Well, what about? I mean, I dread to say it really, but Hall's Gallery. Do you have anything to say on this cover at all, Sean?
Well, I'll personally, it's it's very of its time. That's basically, it screams early 70s. I'll just be brief. It's designed by David Juniper, who was a fellow of Page's from Sutton Art College. So he seemed to have a habit of phoning up ex-art students that he once knew and saying, "Can you do the cover?" Um, so it was the photo was based on an image of the Red Baron's Flying Circus. So it's Jagstaffel 2. So that might, Led Zeppelin 2, Jagstaffel 2. And it's a very early example. I suppose you could call it photoshopping, but obviously without computers. And he's basically supplemented heads for well, you got the band, you've got Peter Grant in there, and I thought the curly-haired figure was Robert Plant, but it's
Yes.
not. Apparently it's Delphine Seyrig, who was starred as Marie Madeline in the film Mr. Freedom, a left-wing anti-war satire. But I thought it was Robert Plant. But yeah, it does look like, no, Robert Plant's in the front, isn't he?
Yeah.
Do you have
Yeah.
any?
Um,
Sorry to interrupt. Do you have any
sorry.
information as to why they included her?
I absolutely no idea. No,
That's
why
that's
that was
random, isn't it?
pretty random, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and of course known as the Brown Bomber because of the lovely 1970s use of brown
Yeah.
paint. And basically behind the image of the Zeppelin, that was the Red Baron's plane basically behind with the Red Baron in it, but they've put the Zeppelin. And we've got a lovely 1970s airbrush image there of a Zeppelin over some sort of classical temple, Roman temple, um, just of its era, basically. I have not more to say. Is there any song lyrics or anything there, Peter? Or
No, no
no,
lyrics.
no,
I
that's
don't know if this is a
disappointing,
sort
isn't
of
it?
reissue. This is a bit of a later
Mm,
one, so there may have been, but they
mm.
do have the tracks
So,
and the
yeah,
obviously who wrote them.
I mean,
Do you find that a bit overblown? The fact
I
that they're
do.
meant,
I find that they're all already sort of wallowing in their own hype a
yeah,
bit there, aren't they?
yeah,
Like the rock gods by the second album.
it's a bit overblown.
Yeah, yeah, it
Yeah,
is. And there you go, the brown bomber.
All right, good. I mean, the thing is that there's a sort of recurring theme here, I think, because we're saying, well, they're not really. I mean, why did they call it Led Zeppelin 2? Why do they call it Led Zeppelin 1? I mean, why are they called Led Zeppelin? I mean, they're not very good on sort of thematizing stuff, are
No,
they?
no.
I mean, so they say like, oh, someone says, was it? I mean, is the apocryphal joke, Keith Moon joke, true? You're going to go down like a Led Zeppelin or something. So they said, oh, that's a good
Yeah,
name for the band. Yeah.
yeah,
And then like so they say, well, what should we do for our first album cover? Let's have a picture of a Zeppelin on it.
yeah,
And then what should we do for the second one? What's it called? Led Zeppelin 2. Let's have a picture of a Zeppelin again, but slightly different to the other one. I mean, it's like you would like. It's not very. I mean, by the time you get to Led Zeppelin 3,
Mm.
then it starts to get more interesting, doesn't it? But
yeah,
this is
yeah,
a
it
bit of a
does.
wasted opportunity, and like it's
Yeah,
like didn't they? It's like they didn't realize it was a metaphor. They just took it
Yeah,
literally,
yeah,
you know.
I
yeah,
suppose you had bands that era. You had Vanilla Fudge, didn't you? You had
Hmm.
Deep Purple, for example. So, well, Black Sabbath. So there was that two-word band title
yeah.
thing going on. So
And that's true. I hadn't thought of that.
yeah,
Yeah,
The
but
yeah,
it's not.
first album as well, is, of course, it has the Hindenburg image on, doesn't
mm,
it? Which I think
yeah,
that sort of black and white image is just
yeah.
a bit more exciting
That
actually than the
works, I
second
think.
album. The
Yeah,
second album looks like the first album cover.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, again, as talked about this before, it might be an element of rushing in here, you
Yeah,
know.
mm,
But yeah, you're right. You're right, Peter. The first album cover is more because also it's their first album, so it's like, oh, we're called Led Zeppelin. Let's have a Zeppelin, you know. But then this one's
yeah,
like, oh, so you're still doing that? Then you're still going with that, you know. Um, Yeah, and I mean it is a weird metaphor anyway, because it was only just a joke. It's like a throwaway joke, isn't it? And
Yeah.
then that becomes like the theme for the whole the
Mm.
whole band. It doesn't make a lot of
But
sense, you know.
didn't Keith Moon want to join though originally, didn't he? Is that,
Really?
well, I'm sure I heard that he wanted to play drums.
Go.
I may have dreamt it, but I'm sure I
Yeah.
read that.
Yeah, that's the first time I've heard that. Although, you know, I mean, you can imagine like sort of Keith Moon probably wanting to jump ship from the Who. I mean, that was the sort of thing that used to happen, wasn't it, in late '60s
Yeah.
British music.
Mm.
Yeah.
All right, good. Well, yeah, okay. Now let's move on to the thanks, Sean. Let's move on
Fine.
to the tracks. Where we're starting with Whole Lot of Love. Maybe I'll start this one off.
Go for it.
I've got quite although I've got quite a lot of notes here. I mean, I really like this track, and I'm going to. I mean, I think it's the first song I heard by them, and I automatically liked it. I mean, I think this is a sort of Led Zeppelin's paradigm song. Really, it's got a lot of their trademarks in it, but it's also like I think it's the riff is just brilliant. I mean, you know, if you're into riffs, I think this is one of the greats, really. If not, perhaps. I mean, I could perhaps now that I think about it, it's sort of the greatest riff ever, I would say, in a sense. It's completely electrifying, and of course, this has been touched on before. But when the bass and the drums come in, you know, it's Page, isn't it? And then Page and Plant, and then John Paul Jones comes in, and then John Bonham comes in, and I mean it's like it's like an itinerary almost for their whole sound and their whole career. You know, it's almost like a manifesto. I think that the. I mean, is it too early to discuss Bonham? I mean,
No, go for it.
I wonder whether a lot of the conversations we're going to have in this episode will be about John Bonham. I mean, I think that this is he's amazing, isn't he? And it's not just that he's a good drummer. I mean, I would like to perhaps set out the thesis here that like he wrote this song in the sense that, and I realise I'm going out on a limb here, but if you listen to the Muddy Waters track, well, it's a Willie Dixon song, isn't it? But there's a Muddy Waters version of it, and the riff for Whole Lot of Love is almost lifted from the Muddy Waters track. I mean, it's obviously it's not the same feel, but it's definitely in there to the point where you think, you know, because Led Zeppelin were famous for copying, which isn't necessarily bad. I mean, it's not necessarily plagiarism, but they were let's say strongly influenced by other things that they heard, and I can almost imagine Page kind of picking that out, you know, because he had good ears and saying like, oh, well, I'll try a bit of that, but until the drums come in, then you haven't really got a track, you know. The drums that Bonham plays at half speed, you know, in comparison to the Muddy Waters track. And they're so iconic. The drumming is so iconic. And the way that when the first fill comes in and he syncopates it, he's slightly ahead of the beat, isn't he? That first snare beat is right as the anacrusis at the end of the previous bar. And then he kind of rolls into the beat, and he starts with the snare, and then he lets the snare drop out in the second half of the bar. So it's just he's playing it all on the bass drum. It's so iconic that it's like without that, this wouldn't have been, you know, this wouldn't be the track that it is. So that's my first sort of thought about the track. I actually do have more to say, but maybe we could do a round because I don't want to do like a monologue. Peter, would you like to give your feelings on
Yeah.
Whole Lot of Love?
Yeah. I'm wondering whether, although I've never heard the Muddy Waters version, he did a lot of shuffles, Muddy Waters. I'm wondering whether it was more like the what is the with that sort of shuffle feel along it. And I can imagine, like you said, Jimmy Page sort of hearing that and going, "That's a really good riff, but it sounds better straight."
Yes,
Kind of
that
thing.
you're right.
Yeah.
Yes, so the Muddy Waters version, if I'm not misremembering, is swung. It's a swing.
Yeah, yeah, it will be. A lot of his stuff was like that. Why I really like the laugh actually at the start. I think it's an unusual way of starting. There's a little laugh just before it comes in, although there it can be a bit messy. Some of these introductions to some of these songs
Mm.
sound a bit messy. I heard, I think it was Immigration Song, and it's really messy. The start of that, it's like they don't come in clean. Robert Plant sounds sensational on this, I think, and I do like the song. I think he just sounds brilliant on this. It really squeezes like everything out of his voice, this, and he sounds fantastic. Again, the lyrics, I can't really get into, I mean, everyone knows the song, of course, but it's very run of the mill. It doesn't feel like you can get involved in it. There's no depth to any of it, really. But then again, I suppose with some blues, it's a bit like that. Bonham sounds great, yeah, especially in that first instrumental section. Loads of space for him to play, and it's got that kind of it's Electric Ladyland. That's what it reminds me of, which came out a year before. That kind of psychedelic guitars swooshing in and out, that sort of pulse underneath, that hi-hat, really open hi-hat sound. That's that kind of psychedelic thing I think they're doing there. Yeah, I think the riff is good. I do like the riff as well. I think it does sum up a lot of what they do well, and it's obviously a good opener for the album as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you said psychedelic, which is an interesting
Mm.
word. I mean, I know what you mean by that. It's the weird thing is that even though this is rootsy, this music, the fact that it's based on feel actually sort of. As I was listening to the album, I started to think actually this opens another door for them because what they do, a lot of what they do is quite avant-garde in a way.
Mm.
And I think that somehow that's actually related. Because the funny thing was, as I put this on, I thought, oh, here we go, Led Zeppelin 2. But as I went through it, I started to like it sort of more. I started to appreciate it more and more. And I thought there's so many interesting gimmicks on it. And
Right.
like Whole Lot of Love when the chorus comes up. Sorry, Sean, I will come back to you in a
No,
second.
no, no.
When
That's
when the chorus comes in, Whole Lot of Love, because you mentioned the lyrics. Actually, most of them are lifted from the original track, but
Right.
that chorus bit I think is their own. Like Whole Lot of Love, that was the bit they wrote. But I think that chorus, oh well, that's kind of crap. That chorus, it doesn't do anything. But then he does that thing with the violin bow, right? He goes no, like that.
Yeah.
mm,
Now he's doing a violin bow, I think, there because like famously used to do on Dazed and Confused. But it sounds really interesting. I mean, it's like, oh, what is? And then of course there's the atmospheric bit in the middle,
Yeah.
mm,
which is kind of weird. Like you think, what's this all about? Of course, on the single version they completely cut that out. But it is kind of like it is like they are trying to be kind of experimental here. And I think sort of largely it works, you know. But anyway, Sean, what are your feelings on this?
yeah,
This was
it's
the one
hard.
that you claimed to murder when you were in your school
We
band.
definitely merged it, especially the psychedelic breakdown part. Um, yeah, I can't add too much more to what's already been said. I think perhaps now, through my ears now, I find a little bit is a bit sort of I don't know, a bit hackneyed.
Mm.
But I did like it. I do like it. Um, yeah, apparently, you were talking actually. You were talking about sort of some of the mistakes, some of the fluffs that they've left on. There's supposed to be some uh, bleed through the tape on Robert Plant's vocals, which
Right.
they couldn't actually get rid of. So Eddie Kramer added echo on that, and they just left it in. So they seem to be a bit serendipitous. I think Led Zeppelin. They sort of whatever. Let's just
Yeah.
it's of the moment. I think that must really get on your wick, Tim. I would.
I think
It's
it's
sort of
saying
moment. But
serendipitous or short of time.
Yeah. Yeah.
sort of time. Well, it could have been because it was all done. I think Plant said this album was sort of made on the run, basically. It was made on tour and in the States
Yeah.
and over here. And he sort of said, it's made on the run from the some of the groupies, I think. So, oh God, don't want to get into that so soon. But yeah, I don't know. We were saying it was. Willie Dixon and Muddy Waters. But apparently, did you know that the Small Faces did a version of it? And this might have been the version that Plant and Page and Plant heard because they went to
Right.
see them apparently in around about 60s, in the mid 60s, and their version was called "You Need Loving." So,
Mm.
I mean,
Mm.
maybe they got the idea. I think basically they did. They nicked it. They said, "Oh, that's good." And I find Robert Plant's sort of orgasmic shrieks a bit oh, cringeworthy, to be
Mm.
honest. You put it on, you think, oh, because I've got younger family members. It's a bit embarrassing, isn't it? So I
Mm.
sort of skipped that bit. And then of course it became the Top of the Pops thing, didn't it, in the
Yeah.
70s? So that's the version I probably heard first. I don't know,
Mm.
as a
Well, yeah, that's right. The
nippler.
top of the pops theme, da
Mm.
da 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 da. That's the bit, isn't it? But
Mm.
it's like that's like how this would have sounded if Bonham hadn't played the drums, which is
Yes.
significantly less exciting.
Yeah, yeah, and it is. You're right. It is Bonham that makes it. I mean, it's so much of Led Zeppelin. There'd be. I mean, could you imagine Keith Moon doing it? What would it be
Oh
like
God.
with?
Well, I mean, last episode we were talking about the difference, between who was it, John Mayhew and Phil Collins. I mean, imagine if John Mayhew had played the drums on this.
Yeah.
I mean,
Oh
this wouldn't,
dear.
they wouldn't be. It's just that there's this whole thing about who's the best drummer
Mm.
ever. Is it John
Yeah.
Bonham or is it Ginger Baker? The best rock drummer ever
Yeah.
is John Bonham, Ginger Baker,
Mm.
or whatever. But
Mm.
like, actually, I just think that John Bonham is more than a drummer.
Mm.
He's writing, isn't he? He's really
Mm.
musical. His contribution to this band is incredibly musical. I
Mm.
mean, I sort of wanted to get, I don't want this to turn into an interview, but I wanted to get your opinion on him, really, Sean, because
Mm.
it's like I've got a note here, like the amazing drum fills at the end, like
Yeah.
after when the guitar solo is like
Mm. Mm.
it's and the beats he plays on the final
Mm.
bit. They're just exquisite, and with
Yeah.
honestly, I'm repeating myself, but without that, I think this just wouldn't be half the track that it is.
Mm.
What do you think about Bonham, Sean?
I think yeah, I mean I think he was described. I think John Paul Jones described him as a heavy jazz drummer or a heavy jazz drummer, and he knew his jazz, and it's another mention for Dave Brubeck's drummer Joe Morello. He was a
Yeah.
big fan of his, and he did a solo later on where he was using his hands and his feet, and switched the snare drum off, and Bonham sort of brought that into Moby Dick, and so he wasn't just a standard sort of rock drummer. He wasn't like sort of a sort of Simon Kirke or someone like that. Was one of his mates, wasn't it, from Free and Bad Company? He had this sort of jazz sensibility which he brought to rock, and I think that I always I always think once you start to lose that in rock and it gets much more metronomic, I tend to start getting bored. Um,
Mm.
so I do think his fills are they're incredible, really. But he gave his all, didn't he? He was a very gutsy player, and I think that it must have been hard to keep that going throughout the 70s and being on tour and recording. He's not sort of sitting back and going through the motions. I think it took its toll on him, and obviously his lifestyle.
Mm.
Apparently, I heard it say I was going to save this all up for Moby Dick, really, but I heard it said that he suffered terribly from nerves from
Oh.
pre going on stage,
Stage
and
fright.
yeah, that's the one. And he was slightly nervous about recording as well, and he was very conscious. I think he basically dictated how he wanted his drum sound. He didn't like Mike. He used didn't like Mike sort of shoved everywhere, so he used a minimum amount on the kit, and the theory was that the big band drummers or the later jazz bebop drummers only had like 3 or 4 mics, but it was just where they were placed basically. So yeah, he would go into the studio and apparently bear hug. It was either Glyn Johns or Eddie Kramer, and say, you're going to give me a good sound today, aren't you? And there was an element apparently of jokiness, but also of threat as well. So I
Yeah,
wouldn't have wanted.
a veiled
Yeah.
Brammy threat.
Uh, but yeah, I mean, he's you know, I can't compare. I love Ginger Baker and John Bonham, completely different drummers, and I equally love both. Ginger Baker's got that African style tom-tom drumming, hasn't he, with his sort of fills. Completely different drummers, completely brilliant in their own right. Bonham liked Ginger Baker. That was one of his influences as well. Loved Ginger Baker, but it wasn't reciprocated
It wasn't
because
mutual.
Ginger famously said John Bonham couldn't swing a sack of shit. So there you go.
Oh God, I
So
love it.
that's it. I've that's it. So I won't say anything now during Moby Dick. We'll just skim over that.
It's all right. Well, yeah. Don't worry about it. It's fine. I think, yeah. I mean, I saw an interview with Ginger Baker the other day, and he said, "Are you?" He said something like, "Oh, are you comparing me with John Bonham or Keith Moon?" He said, if you think I was good as them, ask them." He said, "Oh, well, they're dead. You can't."
Jesus.
Um,
Oh, great. Love him.
Brilliant. All right. Just a quick final word on this chat before we move on. Peter, can I just ask you what you think of the? Do you not like this guitar solo? I mean, it gives me a certain frisson. This guitar solo. I think this is to me. This is where Page's guitar solos are kind of. They have that nervous energy. I like on the first album and the second album.
Do
Do
you
you
mean
not
the
like this one?
do you mean the breakdown where they with the double beats?
Yeah. Bumped.
No,
Bum, ba-dun, da-da, da-da,
yeah.
da-da, da-da, that one.
No, I don't I think that sounds good. It does sound good. I just think that it's he what he does is I just think his judgment is off. Often
Right.
his judgment is off. There's nothing. I mean, guitarists play different styles. Just doesn't suit me. It's just something. There's something about the way he plays which doesn't suit the way that I sort of prefer to hear things. That's all. But no, there are some really good moments on this album. I think it's just. I think there's less hits than misses. Less hits than misses.
Let's yes.
Yeah,
Yeah. All
that's
right,
all.
good. Well, look, unless you have anything else you want to say, I'd feel nervous to move on from this track because I think that's just such an important track. But
Mm,
I suppose we've said most of it that has to be said, but we can come back to one or two things. Um, Maybe let's move on to the next track, What Is and What Should Never Be. Um, I mean, having said that they don't really compose, compose. I mean, this is practically a composition, isn't this one? So I'm
yeah,
kind of contradicting myself. It's got a proper structure, hasn't it? With the exception of the sort of the main riff bit, it's actually got sort of part of a tune. It's got a proper
Yeah.
harmonic structure. I mean, it's even got a modulation in it. So yeah, I think that they seem to have bothered to write something here, and I think it's successful. I really like this track. I also think once again, sorry to repeat myself, but I think that this reminds me that this album is properly programmed because the first track is so
yeah.
sort of like just such a blast from beginning to end, and then they come in with something completely.
Mm.
And if I say to you tomorrow, so it's just so smooth, and that A6 chord is it in the guitar, and it's so sort of subtle, and I think they've really given this some thought, and I really enjoy this track. Sean, do you like
Yeah,
this one?
I'd echo that. It's a really nice complete contrast, isn't it, from Whole Lot of Love? And it's got a sort of jazzy sort of feel. It's really nice. I really like this track. Um, I love that sort of. I call it a sort of a jazzy opening, and then the sort of the middle section. Um, it sort of goes into that sort of riff with the stereo panning.
Hmm.
I really like as well. Nice use of gong as well.
Yes.
Yeah. I love that. It's very rich, and terrific drum fills. And I've put lovely bass playing. I really like the bass. I don't know anything about music really, but I know what I like. So yeah, it's a winner for me. I put not just a metal band, Led Zeppelin. I do think they've got these various influences going on that sort of separate them out a
Yeah.
little, give them the edge over maybe. I like Deep Purple, but
Mm,
I think they got the edge on them. I do like Deep Purple. I'm not knocking
mm.
Deep Purple or their fans here, but I just think they've got a slight edge. But
I was thinking that actually when you were saying that about it's jazzy, um, that reminded me of something that came up when we were discussing Whole Lot of Love, which was the difference between the Muddy Waters version and the Led Zeppelin version. Because basically, you're right, they're versions, as Sean was saying. And actually, Led Zeppelin are playing their Whole Lot of Love is in half time from what the far the double time swing version that Muddy Waters does, as we were discussing. And actually, I think something similar happens here. I think you're right about that, Sean, because when it opens, they're going ding, 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 ding. So it's a kind of a straight four beat, isn't it? But actually, I think implicitly, actually, it's a swing beat. So, because it's when the riff comes in, it could be they could be playing bum ba da ba da tam ba da ba da bum ba da ba da tam. I mean, it could be like what's it called, compound time, and actually, so like that tension between the half time straight beats and the double time swing beats, they're mobilizing that a lot here, aren't they? And it's quite musically um,
they always
intelligent.
they always say Bonham famously played behind the beat, don't they? It's slightly.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Robert Plant said that, but I think that he's not saying that literally, because I don't think he's literally behind the beat, as Peter's look of utter perplexity just indicated. But I think that what they mean is that he is very good at holding the time signature, isn't he? So he's
Mm.
very solid, and because
Mm.
can you imagine trying to keep Jimmy Page in time? I mean,
Uh,
it's a fool's errand, isn't it? But if anyone could do it, he could.
Mm.
Peter, what's your feeling about this track?
I think it's a really nice variation. I think you're right. The programming is good, isn't it? This is just what you need after the sort of headache of that first thing. The thing that sticks out to me, it always has, is just the bass playing and the verse. There's no one really plays like that. I know there were some good bass players around, but no one plays that bluesy bass feel like he does. It sounds really good. Also, there's vocal harmonies in the chorus. In the second half of the chorus, Robert Plant splits into two, and you don't really hear that on this album very much. It's actually a harmony. So, like you were saying, Tim, it's a bit like a song. This, isn't it? It's more like a pop song. This. I have to say though, I only find the verse interesting. That's the bit I like. I like the jazzy chords. I love the bass playing, and I think once you get into this nonsense of other stuff, which is just they cannot hold it back, can they? They couldn't possibly just do a song like that. And then it all comes in. The baby stuff starts up again, which is just a running theme, isn't it? Which is expressive. I'm sure it's expressive, but it's like it feels gap filling a lot of the time. I feel there's also this phrase which just makes absolutely no sense. I don't know what they're talking about, which is I catch the wind and see a spin, sail away, leave today, way up in the sky, and whoa, but the wind won't blow. I really shouldn't go. It only goes to show that you will be mine by taking our time. It's completely like scat poetry, isn't it? There's nothing to be taken from those lyrics, I think.
Yes, it's like he missed the class on mixed metaphors in high school, wasn't
Yeah,
it?
I don't get it.
Well, I mean, we don't need to take too long about all of this. I mean, the fact that the bass has been mentioned there makes me feel like moving on to the next track, the Lemon song,
Mm.
which is incredibly bass heavy, isn't it? Um, I mean, Peter, would you like to say a word about this?
I think we're entering Blues Corner for real here. because I mean, this is where the British blues boom end. You know, this is where it's all been leading to, I think. Which
I
is,
thought you were going to say this is where it all ended.
no, the British blues boom started in the 50s really and took off. You know, when you got Fleetwood Mac really sort of John Mayall, and then you got Fleetwood Mac, you know, and Fleetwood Mac sort of add to it, don't they? And it gets a bit rockier with Peter Green, and then you end up with this, which is proper like blues rock, basically. I think it's a really good partner song, this, to I Can't Quit You, actually, from the first album. It's an attempt essentially to play a 12 bar and to not meddle with it in any way, and do it in their own way. Lyrically, though, I think it is the opposite to I Should Have Quit You, Babe, because actually, of course, on here it's talking about the opposite. So those two songs are actually lyrically sort of opposites, which is kind of interesting in itself. The first and second verse are from Killing Floor, which is the Howlin' Wolf song, an original by him. And Hendrix covered it in '67, you know, from the Monterey. You see it on there, don't you? I don't know if you it's an opening track on the Monterey video, isn't it?
His version's very nice.
It's very nice, but it's kind of, you know, wild. It's a different sort of playing altogether, but it does supersede, you know, this by like, you know, 2 years. And then the other one is Robert Johnson, actually, which is Traveling Riverside Blues, which is where the phrase, "You can squeeze my lemon till the juice runs down my leg," that is the final verse in that song. And Robert Johnson, he had 29 recordings, and some of, you know, 29 songs recorded. There's more recordings, but they're often doubled up. But they've just taken it straight out of the book there, I think. I absolutely love the Lemon song, though. I think it's like a highlight of the album for me. It really suits them down to the ground, this. Everything about it sounds really natural for them to do this. They could have basically been a really good blues band, I think, couldn't they? It was a bit of a dead end, I think, for them, that, you know. As when they, you know, when they leave the blues and you start seeing it a little bit on this album, you know, and Led Zeppelin 3 really starts to show this, that what they can do beyond that. I love the riff, because when I was at school, I didn't know how to play it, and someone showed me you pluck the top two strings of the guitar completely open, and you just play the bass along. I thought that was really clever, that. Bass and drums sound sublime. Not sure about the fast section. I think it's a bit silly. It always sounds a bit silly, like they're going to this sort of weird major chordal thing. I never understood that at all, really. But I think it's interesting to compare them to things like Cream, who had obviously split the year before, but also Fleetwood Mac, of course. Similar kind of feel. They just give it the real boot in this. I absolutely love this track, yeah.
Yeah, it's I was thinking about maybe grabbing my guitar, but I don't think it comes out, does it, on Zoom if you play the guitar for copyright reasons or something? What I was going to say was that Peter, has it got that? Is it that I could just do the shape? Is that a Hendrix chord?
They call it the Hendrix chord. It's E7. It's E7 flat ninth. Yeah, it's the Purple Haze chord.
That's right, yeah. And it's got the sort of minor third and the major third in it as well.
Yeah.
So it's utterly chaotic, but it's lovely. Is it so? I don't know whether
except I think it's the top two strings, actually.
That's all right. Well, let's do it with top two strings, even though none of it will come out.
That's it.
Yeah.
And sorry, the last thing I want to mention is that when they go into the breakdown section, you know, Robert Plant sounds great, but it's a wonderful bass solo. I mean, we all wanted to learn that. When I was like at sixth form, it was like, oh my God, that bass part is so good. Wonderful.
Just one thing. I think that the that bit where they go da 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 da, where there's the time change. That's from the Howling Wolf track, I think, isn't it?
Right.
I mean, actually, they just lifted that straight from it. Almost like, you know, because they got taken to court, didn't they, so much, Led Zeppelin, for nicking stuff, right? And with this track, I think it's funny because it's almost like the rest of the track they've lifted the lyrics from the original song, but they've done their own arrangement of it. But then they've just decided to completely change time and go into a little middle bit, which is like, it's almost like a wink to the audience. We took this from something else, you know. I think if I'd have been the prosecution lawyer, I would have definitely raised that in court. Not that I know how the trial went. Shaun, what's your feeling on Lennon's song?
I can't add too much more to this. I just wondered, I wonder if Hendrix would have liked this version because he wasn't that keen, was he, really, on Zeppelin? Well, he liked Bonham and Page, didn't he? I think he wasn't too keen on the others. Um, so I don't suppose he would have liked this. I think this might have tipped him over the edge a little bit. Um, I, I do find the lemon squeezing gets on my wick a bit. I know
Yeah.
it comes from the blues and Robert Johnson, but I think it's the way Robert Plant does it. Uh,
When you say it might have tipped him over the edge, are you suggesting that this may have led to his death? Because that would have been a very
yeah,
original
I
thesis.
think he just thought, oh, I'll take a few more sleeping tablets. I can't bear it. Anyway, no, but sorry. But
Right.
yeah, the bass playing on this, yeah, again, excellent, isn't it? Really.
Mm,
But yeah,
mhm.
I can't really add a lot more. I think Robert Plant actually does do a very good sort of that sort of black blues, sort of jug band style. It does sound like it could be from the 1930s. He does that
Right.
so well.
Mm.
But in the words of the Bonzo Dog Doodah band, can blue men sing the whites? I don't
Yeah.
know. Is
Yeah.
it acceptable? But he does
Yeah.
a very good impression. So
Yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, I think this is in a way, this song reminds me of the first song because this is a rocker again. This is not as I would say, this is a vibe song. This is a feel song. This isn't really a composition in that sense. But I think that like Whole Lot of Love, it's got good gimmicks, which again sort of point towards a certain avant-garde late 60s British sensibility, so it's kind of like a nice mix. I mean, I like that time change. I think that's kind of I think that's kind of funny. I like the bit where Pagey and John Paul Jones play in unison at the end of the verse. Da, 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 da. I think that's quite cool. Um, yeah, and of course the bass only verse. They decide to have a verse that's entirely unaccompanied except by the musically except by the bass. And John Paul Jones is playing his arse off, isn't he? Um, yeah, and even there's a bit with Bonham where he starts playing the bell of the ride signal, ding
yeah.
ding, like as if like, hello, I'm still here. I think that makes me smile. Yeah, it's just another sort of like fun track, I think. And I mean, really, I like all the tracks on this album. I have to say, I know that people have some ambivalence about this as an album. I think Peter was sort of like pointing to this earlier. Like if you have you ever heard that thing about if you get 12 economists in a room, you'll get 13 different opinions about the economy. I think if you had like along the same lines, if you had like 8 Led Zeppelin fans in a room, you'd have like 9 different favorite albums. I mean, all Led Zeppelin fans seem to like very strongly like one album for
Mm.
and yeah, this is an album that I really like, and I just like the way it all rolls out every track. So that's my
Well,
bias.
I'd like to meet somebody who likes In Through the Outdoor, though.
Yeah, I mean, people often say, "Oh yeah, it's not that great in through the outdoor." I was thinking, you're kidding? It's bloody awful. You know, who can listen to it and think, yeah, well, this slightly off here. This isn't quite right. It's like it's. I think that's a total washout. Anyway, whatever.
Mm.
Um, okay, good. What about Thank You then? I mean, Peter, what do you think about this one?
Little drops of rain whisper of the pain, the tears of love lost in the days gone by. So this is essential. They have to do something like this on the album, don't it? It's a romantic sort of ballad thing, but they just can't pull it off. The only thing I like about this song is that it has the keyboard, actually. It gives it this big backdrop. I really like that. I just think it sounds a bit amateurish. Like, you know, what we need, guys, is something sort of romantic, maybe, to run alongside the album. I know that you like doing all this other stuff, but that doesn't matter. You're going to have one of these anyway. So could you go and write one of those? It doesn't seem like, why would they write this anyway? I don't understand why they'd sit around going, let's write this romantic ballad with really corny lyrics, you know. Together we shall go until we die. So it kind of, for me, you know, it's sort of pointless, really. I don't buy it.
Mm. So you skip ahead to Heartbreaker, do you?
No, because it's that same thing that happens every time, which is what I really like is the way it's sort of leading towards something, you know, leading towards something. And so I sort of would bear it, you know. I don't know. The keys, that's what interests me, I think, the keyboard.
Well, again, yeah. I mean, it's good. Yeah, it's good. It's good programming, isn't it? I mean, you're right. This is like I remember you said to me once, Peter, years ago, that you hated what was it, Underture at the end of side two of Tommy, because it just goes on for about 10 minutes. It
Yeah.
doesn't, you know, just meanders. But then you said that you thought that they had to put it there, you know, almost as if it was a formal requirement, you know.
Mm.
So you probably feel the same about that as you do about this. Then, like, this is just a formality, just
Yeah.
initial here, and we'll move on to side two.
Possibly, but Underture is structural, isn't it? I've come to realize that this isn't structural. This is just sticking in a ballad.
Yeah, but isn't that structure? I mean, if you have a, you know, let's
No,
just something. Yeah.
no. Tom, we'll talk about Tommy another time, I'm sure. But Tommy has an overarching structure. I don't think this does, this album.
Tommy's going to be the Christmas special, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I mean, I think this again. This is a programmatic question. I don't think it's too bad. This song. I mean, we were talking earlier about like, you know, like whether you're writing pop songs or whether you're writing blues, doing blues stuff. You know, this makes me think that there's still the sort of poppy. This is the sort of Yardbirds, isn't it? Like the kind of the oscillation between the blues, and then somebody
Mm.
says, "Oh, let's write a pop song." You know. Of course, the Yardbirds being the precursor to Led Zeppelin. And yeah, so I think that this is again, yeah, I think it works programmatically. This is why I don't really like Led Zeppelin one so much because I think it's stylistically quite uneven, whereas this one I think isn't. You know, and so I think this track, Thank You, again, as I said earlier in the second track, I think it's got it's got a proper harmonic structure at least. This track. I don't know if it's an especially great song, but I think it kind of works on its own terms, you know. Um, and I think perhaps you're right. Yeah, talking about In Through the Outdoor before, I mean, that was John Paul Jones's sort of keyboard album, wasn't it? That's why it's, you know, produces such mixed reactions. And I think that at some point they would just let John Paul Jones get on his Hammond organ or something and start, you know, noodling. This sounds like the kind of thing he might have come up with. I don't know. Again, Hammond organs are American, aren't they? So this is again a sort of slightly folksy American kind of sound. Well,
Mm.
almost San Francisco, is it? You know, like that sort of. It's kind of slightly evocative of that San Francisco
Mm.
sound, I think. But yeah, it's not so bluesy this one. Sean, are you a fan of this track?
I actually quite like this. I agree. You know, the lyrics are a little bit heavy-handed, aren't they? For me, I don't know why it's sort of slightly cod medieval. It conjures that, you know, and Plant was into sort of Welsh legends, wasn't he? I think that's where he used to go on holiday, didn't he? But you know, it's easy, isn't it, from Brumland to North Wales. So yeah, I don't know why it has that sort of feel. I like the atmospherics of the Hammond. It's just quite a sweet little song, really. I quite like it. Somebody here from Pitchfork magazine, Mark Richardson. I was going to say Stumpy, Paul Stump, but he hasn't got much to say about Led Zeppelin, I'm afraid.
Stumpy's back.
Well, no, he hasn't got a lot to say about Led Zeppelin, I'm afraid. So don't think he's that keen. But you know, they do say, oh, it's mixing folk with proto metal. But it's a little bit folky, isn't it? But as you say, it's yeah, they've got that American influence rather than English folk, I'd say. Um, although, you know, they knew I mean they all sort of knew the English folk groups, didn't they? Like Bonham knew he knew is it Peggy, didn't he? Dave Pegg.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, yeah, they were drinking partners, weren't they?
yeah, I think they may have played in an early band and Dave Mattox, I think, was a mate of Bonham, so you know, and obviously Sandy Denny, didn't they? But Yeah, it's okay. I don't mind it. Don't mind it at all. I think you're right that it's Plant's lyrics that are the elephant in the room, aren't they? You know, he's not a great. He'd thump you, wouldn't he, if you went up to him and said that? You know. But he isn't. He's no Ian Anderson, is he? That's the thing.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, but who is, I mean, it's kind of
Mm.
difficult, isn't it, for a lot of people to write words. I mean, a lot of the times I think as long as words are not too, intrusive, then you can forgive them, can't you? I think, but
Mm.
maybe he's crossing the line a little bit here. Not as much as on Heartbreaker, though. I'll come back to that in a minute. Um, all right, good. Well, let's move on to Heartbreaker then, because I think probably not much more to say about Thank You. Although it does, again, have I said it has a proper harmonic structure. It's also got a modulation in the middle. I don't know if you noticed that, Peter. It's weird. It suddenly goes into A from D, and then they have to find a way to get out of it. Which again, I think is quite sort of like interesting in a way. Like it's more harmonically interesting than it might seem. This track, I think.
Right.
Um, Okay, so yeah, what about Heartbreaker then? I mean, I to start us off, I think I would say that this is again we're back to Whole Lotta Love, Lemon Song. I think this is a vibe song, but it's got some nice gimmicks in it, which I think again is sort of a function of the fact that they're doing a vibe song. I've made a note of the fact that I like the variation in the time signature at the end of the verse where it goes da 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 dum. Like it's a sort of it's just interesting, it's like musically interesting that. And
Mm.
again, it's difficult for me, not to think that that was actually a Bonham
Mm.
lick. But I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm giving him too much credit. But yeah, of course, the unaccompanied guitar solo. I mean, who who would have thought of doing that? And I think it's pretty successful. I mean, he couldn't always reproduce it live. I mean, there is famously footage of the Atlantic Records anniversary celebration where he does a sort of like I don't know, slightly drink fueled uh, arthritic reproduction of this solo. And I mean, I can't imagine like, the looks on the faces of the people around him are priceless. But yeah, I think this kind of works again, this track. Sean, do you like this one?
To be honest, yeah, no. I always start this when I've got a criticism. I go, well, to be honest, I find
Well,
it really boring, and I can't wait to, I find it a bit of a chore to listen to. I find it repetitive. Can't stand the lyrics on this, to be honest. I find them just sort of, I don't know. It's the start of cock rock for me. It's sort of cocky. It's
Mm,
it's the side of Led Zeppelin I don't like. Drumming's good on it though. Um, good performance, but I just find it a just boring, repetitive song really. And it's true. I mean, I think that guitar solo is just it's him showing off. There's no reason for it, and he couldn't really play it live. I mean, I've heard it on numerous bootlegs, and he always seemed to screw it up, whether it was drink or drugs or whatever it was. And you'd think someone would tell him, "Should
or
we just
bad playing.
should we just drop that one?" It's like sort of George, at least like George Harrison when it was Let It Be, wasn't it? And they were going to go up on the roof, and he was like, "Oh, I don't really want to do that because I don't know if I can do that live." At least he sort of knew his limitations, what he's capable of. But Page was the total opposite. But I think it sort of went to his head really in the mid 70s. He thought he was some sort of guitar god, didn't he? And he wasn't. He was good. I mean, let's be honest. Great at riffs, and you know, you. I don't know where he stood it in the Yardbirds. Was he the rhythm player with Jeff Beck? I can't remember where
he played bass for a while, didn't he?
we played bass. So I mean, he's very rhythmic in his playing, is what I would say. And he is good, but he's not the most fluid of players, is he? I mean, I don't know anything. I'm not a can't. I don't know which way round to hold a guitar, but to my ears, that's what I'd say. But he can't hold a candle to Hendrix, can he? Let's be honest. If Bob's listening, his ears are going to be burning. My friend Bob. Well,
Don't worry, he won't be listening.
you won't be listening, no.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, I remember he did set himself up for failure a lot, didn't he, Jimmy Page? I mean, he had that double-necked guitar, didn't he, that he
Yeah.
played for, I don't know what mime I'm doing there. He played Stairway to Heaven on, and I read someone talking about a gig that they'd seen in the later on in the 70s where they were kind of a bit worse for the wear, you know, and there was too much excess and too much drugs going on and drink and everything, and they kind of lost their way a bit, you know. And they said that during Stairway to Heaven they saw Jimmy Page strumming the lower guitar and fingering the upper guitar. You know, so I don't know how much he'd had to drink that night, but anyway, Peter, what are your feelings about this one?
The thing is with this one is that I know you said about, oh, you know, this is where the lyrics are really falling apart, but the thing is, because the limitations of the sort of lyrics generally on this album, apart from a few moments, I think that the best you can get out of this is whether they scan well. And I think a line like "some people cry and some people die by the wicked ways of love, but I just keep on rolling along with the grace from the Lord above" is actually a really good line, because it suits the feel so well. And it's a bit like sort of beat poetry, isn't it, with Plant. It's like if it flows, that's the best you're going to get, basically. If it's not too corny, you know, and it just feels the groove, then I think that's good enough, really. So in a sense, I quite like the lyrics on this. It kind of tells a story as well. It actually has a purpose to it. I think that this album, this particular track, displays what they're trying to do across the album. It's only occurred to me later, which is they kind of have a spotlight, don't they? Which is, you've got like Moby Dick, you know, for the drums, and then you've got these sort of moments of bass, like probably the Lemon song. And then you've got this horrific guitar moment in this song, which I find embarrassing. I find the whole thing really embarrassing. He cannot pull it off at all. It's this overbending, like somehow, if I just do something like completely different, it somehow is great, but it's not, is it? It's just, it's hard to listen to. And especially when he goes into the fast bit, he can't even actually finger this very well. And I know full well that he can play a lot better than that, because you've seen some of those early videos are amazing of him playing. This is a really bad capture of Jimmy Page, and it's totally pointless, because what they do is afterwards they come straight back in with the beat, don't they? Into another little section there where he sort of plays something far more interesting, actually, and well played. But I think there was a kind of feeling that maybe everyone needs to have a spotlight or something on this album, where you need to do something, you know. I love the way the verse comes back in, by the way. There's this sort of ending, isn't it? Suddenly just crashes to an ending, and then suddenly they just come straight back in with the start again. It's quite odd, that, really, for them. They kind of like, they've just fused two bits together. The other thing is that Nirvana used to play this live. It was, I think it's the only Led Zeppelin song they played. They used to love this track. I think it's the riff, isn't it? It's a riff you can play, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. I'd like to take issue with your argument, Peter, that the lyrics scan, though, because check this out. One thing I do have on my mind, if you can clarify, please do. It's the way you call me another guy's name when I try to make love to you. I try to make love, but it isn't no use. Give it to me. Right? For a start, that first bit, it sounds like he's writing a letter to the council. And also, you know, you call me another guy's name when I'm trying to make love.
Derek.
It's not like you call me another guy's name when I'm making love to you. It's, you call me another guy's name when I'm trying to make love to you.
I'm trying, yeah.
And then he says, you know, I try to make love, but it isn't no use, which presumably is a different point. But and he says, give it to me, which is a direct contradiction. So I don't know.
Yeah, sorry.
Maybe they just. I mean, you're right. The rest of it works, but that bit's a lapse, I think.
Yeah.
All right, good. I think we've said enough on that. Let's go on to Living Loving Maid, which obviously is the strongest track on the album. Sorry, I couldn't get through that without giggling. No, this is the worst track, I think, for me. It very much annoys me that this is... it's slightly lower pitched than the previous track, because it's supposed to go straight from Heartbreaker into this, almost as like a medley, you know. but it's like I don't know, it's like an out of tune medley. I mean, this is the only sort of lapse in the programming on the album, I think. And yeah, I think again this is the sort of alternating styles because we've got the vibe track of Heartbreaker, and then this is a bit more songy, a bit more sixties ish, I think. Um, but yeah, so it's sort of I don't know as a sort of quasi coda, slightly out of tune coda to Heartbreaker. I think it kind of works. It also doesn't outstay its welcome, but so I think it's again good programming. But obviously, I don't think this is a good track. Peter, do you have anything to say on this one?
I think this was the song that we learned. This was it. We used to really like the song because it's a nice short poppy song, isn't it? And the riff, we like playing the riff really. It also has the word alimony in. Now, given that they wrote this song, I think it's a real American thing. No one talks about alimony over here, do they? I think the problem is that it stops and starts too much. They don't actually know what to do with it. It's like an idea that comes to an end, so they just start again. So there's no overarching sort of construction of this song at all, is there really? Bonham sounds amazing on the verse, though. The drumming on the verse of this really stands out. It sounds fantastic. It's not an easy beat to play, actually, I don't think. That's sort of driving forward. There's this other what the hell moment, come on, baby, on the roundabout. On the roundabout. That's a child's playground thing. Ride on the merry-go-round. We all know what your name is, so you better lay your money down.
Ooh,
Terrible.
yeah, shocking.
I think he sings alimony, alimony, paying your bills.
Yeah.
So maybe he's just defining what alimony is for a British audience. It's just being just a sort of piece of information, point of information,
No, but alimony would be childcare. You see, what she's doing is she's paying other things with it, so that's not really on.
Oh right, yeah. So she is to blame then. Sean, any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I'd agree. Not the strongest card in the pack, is it, this one? And the band thought it was filler as well. I think it's probably a result of the making this album a bit ad hoc and running out of time to get it out. So they probably thought, oh, well, let's just stick this on. It does sound very 1960s, though, doesn't it? That riff, and that riff's quite not quite nice. So very 60s feel. Yeah, Page said that was his least favorite Led Zeppelin song of his entire catalogue. I beg to disagree, actually. There's quite a few you could choose, I think. Anyway, but the public clearly liked it because it reached number 65 in the US as a single and number 93 in Japan. There you go. Why the hell did they release it as a single?
Yeah, they didn't release any singles, did they, in the UK? Is that right? They released one in America, I think, "Whole Lotta Love," with the interesting bit in the middle edited out. But they might have issued singles in other territories, I guess. Japan, yeah,
Japan,
Belgium. Most people issue stuff in Belgium, don't they?
Mm.
Drop the Belgian material. All right, good. I think we've said enough on that track for posterity. So let's go on to Ramble On. Sean, do you want to talk about this one?
I possibly best song on the album in my opinion. But again, he's dropped Plant's dropped the sex stuff for Tolkien, hasn't he? So
yeah,
you've got references to Mordor and Gollum and Sauron, the evil one, of course. Because I expect he was just going around reading Lord of the Rings, wasn't he, and the Silmarillion. He was into that sort of stuff, and the Welsh myths and legends, wasn't he? Anyway, yeah, I like this. Apart from possibly, I think it's now this was a quote here from somebody called Caitlin Vaughan Carlos, who's a musicologist. Does that ring any bells, Tim, with you? I'd never heard of him. Anyway, or her. It could be her, couldn't it?
Gonna say.
Sorry. Yeah, oh dear, I'm in trouble. This song apparently reflects a rejection of urbanism and a pining for a romanticized rural Britain. So, very
No,
early
it's
stirrings of
deeply fascist then.
Yeah. Um, but they never performed it live apparently until the tribute in 2007, Armour Ertegun tribute. But yeah, I like it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like I think this sounds like what talking about the folky thing. I mean, I think this sounds like what Led Zeppelin 3 would have sounded like if it was good.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I think that it's yeah, it's a lovely. I think this is a lovely track. I agree with you. I think it's probably almost the best on the album. I mean, I think for me, Whole Lot of Love pips it to the post, but that's just because it's so iconic. But I think Ramble On is really worth. It's worth the wait, isn't it? That's what I always think. Um, I think again, it's a sort of it's more songy as we were saying. It's more folky. So this goes to sort of more English. It goes more British. Let's say I shouldn't say English because you were mentioning Wales before, but like yeah, it's got that it's got slightly it's more harmonically interesting. I mean, I think the bridge where they go dun 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 when it goes sometimes I get so tired that bit I think is kind of more pleasant. And then of course it goes very feel again in the chorus because it goes kind of rocky. But I think that's all right. It's a sort of 1-2 punch, and I love the again I love Bonham's drumming. He does a similar thing here to what he does on Whole Lot of Love, I think, which is that he he only plays the snare in the first half of the bar. So he goes down, and he's back.
Yeah.
It's all bass drum, isn't it, in the second half of the bar? And again, I just think it's exquisitely
We, I was
good.
going to say that we haven't mentioned his foot, have we? They
Mm.
should have preserved his bass drum foot, really.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Very,
like what you mean, like Chairman Mao?
yeah.
He could
We
have
could
put it in
venerate, we
Westminster Abbey.
we could go and venerate it, couldn't we?
People could have like filed around it in Westminster Abbey. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, good. Peter, you a fan of this track?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that the other three of us think that, but I think this is really probably my favorite, and it is worth the wait. And it sort of wakes me up to the fact that all the baby stuff, it does lead to this, and I think this is a kind of way forward for them, isn't it? Because this becomes more of the norm actually later on, and it's interesting when you look at albums and the way that they evolve from album to album. You think, oh, that's the key, isn't it? That's the signifier. It's a bit like on the second Radiohead album, you've got the Fake Plastic Trees, which sort of leads you through to the next album. That's the thing that's changed then. I think lyrically it's more interesting as well. The autumn moon lights my way and the stuff about obviously Maud, or that's really good. There is beautiful guitar harmony parts. In a way, when those two guitars come in together, I think they're guitars, aren't they? They're not those ringing guitars, that sort of Frippatronics guitar. It's sort of like, for me, it's like the best moment on the album. It resonates it's so spiritual, that moment. I just think, my God, if they could get more of this in here, more of this just well-timed, just dropped in at the right moment. I love that moment.
That was the bit I was trying to reproduce
Right.
badly. Yeah, exactly. It's
That's
lovely.
a fantastic moment on the album, actually. And it's odd that that's just something they probably didn't think that much about, but it really resonates beautifully, that. And I think, it kind of makes it one of the best, really, because I like their kind of slightly later Led Zeppelin. It's not really this bit, it's after this. I find them more interesting. And I think this is a sort of indicator of that.
Um, yeah, I mean, sometimes I feel a bit guilty about because it was. Let's be fair, it was me that suggested this one. I feel a bit guilty about it because I know that people have mixed feelings about it. And as I was saying before, like some people prefer like later Led Zeppelin stuff. But yeah, we'll come back to that another time, I guess. I mean, I'm not a big fan of the. I can't work out why he starts singing about Lord of the Rings halfway through. Because at the start it seems to be like a love song, and then all of a sudden he starts talking about Morty, and every time he says Mordor, I think, hang on, where's this come from? You know,
Yeah.
what is this song about Lord of the Rings? And I suppose it could be, but I mean, no one's really rambling, are they, in Lord of the Rings? I mean, there is a journey, but it's not like they're just rambling about. It's not
No.
like they've gone hiking.
They've got
Uh,
a ring to destroy.
well, quite. Okay, good. Obviously we're all big fans of that one, so that's
Mm.
interesting. Um, let's go on to Moby Dick then, shall we? I mean, I think Sean's already exhausted himself on this one. I mean, my key question with Moby Dick is, to what extent do you think that John Bonham captures the essence of Melville's novel?
Yeah.
Um, I mean, this is Led Zeppelin's version of Toad, isn't it? By Cream, basically. You know, but which is better?
Right.
Fight. Only one way to find out. Now it's like I think this is better, isn't it? Because it's only 4 minutes and Toad lasts 15 minutes. I think Moby Dick has it. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. What? I mean, Sean, do you have anything to add on this track?
Well, I don't think have I mentioned the Jimi Hendrix quote about his foot
No.
No.
that he said he loved John Bonham because he had a right foot like a rabbit on the pedal.
Ah,
Like
So
Thumper.
we're back to his foot again.
something.
Yeah, I mean the riff is sort of all right, isn't it? That introduces it. Sort of, it's not okay. It's hard to it is hard to make a drum solo interesting. I think, apart from Phil and Chester and Genesis, you could that's exciting. I think as you say, this is merciful because it's only what 6 minutes, isn't it, or 4 minutes of soloing.
Oh,
But he does make it interesting, and he varies what he's doing. He's not although he liked drummers like Buddy Rich. It's not like blistering snare drum rudiments, is it? It's he uses his hands and feet. He's lit. I mean, God knows how he did it, but um, it's just got tonally, it's quite interesting. I think it's got some interesting sounds. Um, he's got a lot of use of that sort of triplet thing that he used to play, the old Bonham triplets. Um, I think for non-drummers, it's bearable. It's exciting. He's very he puts his heart and soul in it, I suppose you could say, and that comes through on it. I mean, mind you, having said that, it's bearable for non-musicians to listen to. Well, she wasn't my English teacher at school, but we all knew someone called Miss Beeger. I think probably going back to Joe Butler, she would remember. Actually, Annie had her for my missus had her for English, I think. And we had her. She took our English class. I think our English teacher was. I'm really digressing.
this is what you call anecdotal, I think.
Sorry, sorry. She took our one of our English lessons. I think we were doing "Far from the Madding Crowd" or something like that. Anyway, we got
Well, are
on.
you sure? Are you sure it was Far from the Madding Crowd? I
She
mean,
liked
let's be accurate about it at least.
she liked the Smiths, by the way. Anyway, and I digress. So I said to the producer, no, I didn't. She said, yeah, I went to see Led Zeppelin because we were all getting into Led Zeppelin in those days, 87, 86, 88, that sort of era. And she said, they're the most boring band I've ever seen. There was a drum solo that lasted for half an hour, and I've never been so bored in all my life. And I just sort of discovered Led Zeppelin at that point and loved Moby Dick and snagged it off in my English lesson. So anyway, but I think it's great. I like the sound you get. You can't I can't go on about his sound enough. He had a very, apparently he tuned his unlike a lot of other drummers, he tuned his drum heads very tight. This is really boring stuff, isn't it, for non-drummers? But that's exactly what jazz drummers do. Um, a fantastic sound that he achieved. Maybe, it got a bit excessive live. I can understand that, and they did. I think it got called over the top rather than Moby Dick in the performances. And, he had kettle drums, didn't he? And he had his gong and everything, which he set light to, didn't he? I think. Didn't he set light to it at
Didn't
the
know
end?
that.
Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, um, But yeah, great, I think.
Is it like is there like an an African influence? I mean, you were talking about Ginger Baker earlier. I don't know whether Ginger Baker was influenced by African drumming early on or whether that only came later on. But I mean, it
Later, I
just
think.
I wonder whether the sort of the hand stuff. Um, I wonder
Well,
if there's any.
yeah, you see that apparently Joe Morello did it. So I think he was influenced by him quite a lot. And Joe Morello's drum solos are quite musical sounding. That's what I like about them. They're not. I mean, he is a great technician of the drums, but I'm just making the comparison. Joe Morello is like the opposite in jazz terms to say um, Buddy Rich, who's shit hot and technique everywhere. Joe Morello's much more relaxed and a musical sort of drummer, and I think Bonham's a bit like that. He's more musical than, although he's very heavy and everything, than blasting it out. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how. I, I mean, I made the case earlier on that he was a very musical drummer. I don't know how musical how much of a musician he actually was. I don't know if he ever played any other instruments. He only seemed interested in playing the drums, didn't he?
Yeah.
Um, but I wonder to what extent he appreciated, melody and harmony and stuff like that, or whether he had any
Mm.
training in it or anything like that. Peter, do you have anything to say on this number?
Yeah, it's interesting, Sean. You're saying about people who don't play the drums maybe won't get it, or I find it tricky to just listen to a free form drum solo.
Mm.
What I do like though, and Sean, you'll know this form very well. At the end of the sort of jazz trios, you always have a little drum break, don't you? What they tend to do is keep that hi hat going, and so you
Yeah.
can really appreciate their
Yeah.
syncopation because you know where the pulse is. What I find difficult is when drums break down into nothing. I find that much more difficult to listen to. I just don't find it as interesting. The interplay between instruments, I love it when drums do their bit then, but it doesn't really interest me. So it's never been a track that I've really listened to. However, I think the riff is brilliant on this. It's a really good riff, properly developed, full riff. And it goes through the 12 bar, doesn't it? The whole thing. It's well written, I think. And those that I like the start and end, basically. You got a cowbell or something in there as well. Um, I think there's the elephant in the room, to say that again, is that the timing in the breakdown. I can't believe how bad John Bonham's timing is. He comes in late on several of those, when they break down and you hear the guitar, and then he comes in, but it's always slightly late. And I've sat there and counted it,
Mm.
and he has to eventually they put the hi-hat in or something, but something did not happen right on that day, and they did not correct it, and it sounds
Mm.
awkward. I think Bonham suddenly sounds like he can't
They did
count or
they
something.
did say that it didn't quite capture his live performance of it. So
What
again, maybe it
um,
was rushed. I don't know.
It's
That's
a
so.
glaring
what
error on the album.
Hmm.
what I would say is that if I had to put money on whether Bonham was late or Jimmy Page was
No,
rushing.
it's not that. It's not that. You count it. You try counting those sections, and he comes in late
Okay,
quite a few times. It's awkwardly late.
and listen to that.
Right, right, right. I wonder to what extent they recorded this live in the studio. I mean, actually, I think they did a lot of it live in the studio, didn't they? Or am I
Hmm.
wrong
Yeah,
about that?
no, they did.
I do wonder about the politics, so to speak, of putting a drum solo on an
Mm.
album. I mean, you know, was it like considered normal? Was it normal? Was it? I mean, is it to what extent is it considered aesthetically valid? To put a drum solo on a rock album. I don't know.
Because they
Uh,
were big live, weren't they? Drum solos had really become something at that point in time. They were a thing. But to put it on an
Yeah, I
album's a
mean, it,
different thing,
it
isn't it?
it it is coming out of that era, isn't it, of Cream and Hendrix, and it's the super group, the superstar musicians. It's like, look at what I can do,
Yeah.
Whereas you don't need to do that now. There's a different ethos, isn't it? But in
Mm.
those days, they were like superheroes, weren't they? Weren't they? So
The funny thing is Sean, when you say now, I suspect that the now that you're talking about is not now, but now in about 1995.
well,
Like in
you
1995, you would say now,
that's
yeah, we don't do that stuff anymore. I mean,
that's
now, none of this exists
that's when I
anymore.
stopped listening to music in 1995.
Well, there you go. There you go. Um, All right, great. Well, look, let's go on to the final track. Now, this one again. Um, I apologize for repeating myself earlier, but it's impossible not to repeat yourself because there's certain, like recurring tropes here, as everybody says nowadays. I mean, this is actually sort of a cover, this track, isn't it? I think of a Sonny Boy Williamson number,
Mm.
and it's basically note for note, uh, until the middle bit where the whole band comes in with the riff, and that is pure Led Zeppelin. It's like again we were talking about. Well, I was talking about folk music earlier. I mean, I think this is like like in folk music, you would say of traditional, arrangement band or whatever. Like Fairport Convention used to do. Um, but these aren't really traditional songs exactly. I mean, they're actually just songs written by black men from
Mm.
from Chicago. But I think as a sort of like medley, it works pretty well, and I do think once again it's programmed right. This is a good ending for me. I like the um, a bit like Whole Lot of Love, beginning of Whole Lot of Love. I like the way that the band all come in one after the other, and it. I just think it's really sort of raucous, funky guitar riff, and then you've got the drum and bass artillery.
Mm.
So I think this sort of again good programming bookends the album,
Mm.
um, and yeah, I feel like we're going out on a high here, really. Peter, what do you think?
Interesting how Robert Plant refuses to use his own voice, though, in the intro and the outro. I don't understand that. I think what you're talking about, Tim, is it's sort of pre-Chicago, really. It's sort of wartime, all the bands started forming. And that's what, the sort of 60s bands based themselves on. But this is really like earlier kind of blues feel, this. Sort of harmonica and, guitar. It's sort of an earlier feel, I think. What it does remind me of is how many of those 60s singers were good harp players. I think it's a real lost art that if you look at any of those bands, even the pop bands like Hollies, etc., they had really good harp players. For some reason, the lead singers were really good at playing harp, and they did it really well. And he does it really well on this as well. You just don't. It's like a throwaway thing, isn't it? But actually, it's really well done, I think, by him. He has some
Mm.
great phrases in there. I really like the riff in the middle section as well. I think it works really well. It's kind of modernist feel to it because it twists between the minor third, doesn't it? The major, which is something Hendrix did quite a lot. He was one of those kind of he sort of led the way a bit with that. You can sort of blend this sort of rock and blues style together. So I really like the whole thing. I think, and it works really well at the end, doesn't it? When it sort of comes back down. I just don't understand why he's putting a voice on. I find that slightly nauseating when he doesn't really need to. He's got a good blues singing voice. He doesn't need to pretend to be, Sonny Boy Williamson or whoever he's trying to be.
I mean, I think he's imitating Sonny Boy Williamson,
Yeah.
basically. I mean, it's almost like a joke.
Why?
And then they didn't expect to get sued. It is kind of hilarious. um, although, again, I mean, I know it's not really plagiarism, is it exactly? I mean, I think some money was owed to a few people, but this is such sort of, again, feel music, isn't it? It's not like you've copied a sequence of notes or anything.
No.
But this is pretty blatant, this one, isn't it? To what extent do you think they were influenced by Hendrix?
I don't know. I think it's hard, isn't it, for any guitarist to not really,
Hmm.
to have noticed that, and especially the British guitarists, of course, who kind of gathered round, didn't they? And they were like, "What the hell is going on? Who let him in?" And I think he's such a visionary. He's a great player, a great live player, but he's really a visionary in terms of what the guitar can do. And I just don't think that could have escaped them, really.
Sean, do you have anything on for us on this?
Yeah, I agree. It's quite a nice closer. I think this thing about, Plant doing his Black Blues Man impression, it's sort of like the oral version of the black and white minstrel show. I always think, is he blacked up,
Yeah.
in the studio? It's a horrific thought, isn't it? But he does it quite well, doesn't he? Really, it's quite
Hmm.
a good impression. But yeah, it just makes me think this song when the sort of the end section, the guitar riffing and everything comes in. I think I've seen them or heard them do it live, and I always think, it sounds really hollow because I don't know whether it's hard, isn't it? You know, I suppose there's lots of overdubs on Zeppelin albums, and then when they sort of play it live, it's sort of
Right.
there's something missing, or it just
Mm.
doesn't quite pull off for me. Like some of these songs when they actually come to perform them. And they could be pretty ragged live, I think, as the '70s wore on. And you sort of they gloss over it and they sort of say, oh well, it's the feel of it and so on. But I've listened to some awful bootlegs over the years where I haven't given one mention of Satan in this podcast. So shout out. Oh God, I wish I hadn't said that. But
What
you
did you
know,
want to say about Satan?
well, I think this is the thing with Led Zeppelin that I think at this point, this album, I always think, it's quite to me, it's quite exciting, and I put it on again, and it's quite nostalgic, and it's quite vibrant. And I think as the '70s sort of wore on, I mean, a Page got in in the room. Page got into the occult, didn't he? And I think there's references. There's supposed to be a reference on Led Zeppelin 3, isn't there? Of Aleister Crowley, isn't it? So mote it be, or something like that. And I don't know. To me, Led Zeppelin. I think I mentioned this on the Instagram page that I always have to play something nice after played Led Zeppelin because they leave a sort of. I do love them, I still like them, but don't play them as much as I used to, if rarely actually. But if I put them on, I sort of feel I need like a sort of palate cleanser or something because there's just this taint for me of reading about what they got up to and what Page was into. And I think when I was younger, I sort of thought, oh, what a lark. But now I sort of think, oh God, you
I
know.
think I think it's
I
interesting
know.
that when you say about Shaun, you say that we used to listen to Zeppelin and really don't listen to it as much now. And I think
Mm,
there's a generational thing going on there as well, which is
mm,
we are the children of that generation, so we've
mm,
sort of been passed it down. Now to look back at Led Zeppelin is a long way.
mm.
That's your grandparents, isn't it? So
Yeah.
that's a much further distance to go back to, and they have a lot more music to take from actually.
Mm,
Whereas for us, it kind of is more going to be the thing we grasped at when we were teenagers, because
yeah.
that's actually what had happened before, us.
Mm,
There was one other thing I was just going to say to him, which was this idea of playing live, which is, there's this sort of dilemma, isn't there? Is how much do you produce an album? Because ultimately you've got to play that live. And if there's four of you in Led Zeppelin, they're not going to get a keyboard player in, are they? Or
mm.
another guitarist, because it needs to stand as the four of them live. But then Shaun says, yeah, it sounds a bit hollow when they actually do it live. So it's kind of, I quite like honesty in rock music, and you sort of take out what you actually record. Maybe you should be more honest in the recording.
Mm.
Well, I think what I would say is that their albums sound amazing. I think they're pretty consistently amazing sounding, their albums. I don't know if you would agree with that, but they really took their time to get a good sound.
Mm.
John Bonham sounds great on every single track they ever did.
Mm.
And so they say Jimmy Page produced it. I don't know to what extent that's true, how
Mm.
much he relied on engineers, but I think that because he wasn't bad at taking credit for things he hadn't done. Jimmy Page. But like I think for what it's as a producer, he does a pretty good job. And then live is a completely different
Yeah.
kettle of fish, isn't it? And I think that you're right, Sean. I mean, like with three musicians and a singer, you're not going to be able to reproduce quite this sound. On the other hand, when they started, if you listen to the Royal Albert Hall concert from
Yeah.
1970, they sound bloody amazing.
Yeah,
Mm.
they do.
But then then you think of Live Aid.
Yeah.
I mean, they did go downhill, and I mean, I don't know. You were mentioning. You were quite insistent on mentioning Satanism. I wonder whether your argument was that because famously Robert Johnson, who they quote repeatedly, sold his soul to the devil, right, at the crossroads, and
Mm.
then became talented.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you saying is your argument that with Led Zeppelin it was the other way
It was
round?
an
That
inverse
he's
reaction.
that he Page sold his soul to the devil and then got worse.
That's about it. Yeah. Oh,
All
dear.
right. Well, let on that note, on that bombshell, let's leave it. I thanks very much for your thoughts, fellas, and please remember to like and subscribe and do comment. We are interested in discuss opening up the discussion, as it were. And we'll see you all again on the next episode of Crapper, which should be in a week or two. Okay, thanks everyone.
Bye bye.
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 Bye.